Chapter Introduction Episode 1 Origins of the Four Men. The extensive wars wherewith Louis XIV was burdened during his reign, while draining the state's treasury and exhausting the substance of the people, nonetheless contain the secret that led to the prosperity of a swarm of those bloodsuckers who are always on the watch for public calamities, which, instead of appeasing, they promote or invent so as, precisely, to be able to profit from them the more advantageously. The end of this so very sublime reign was perhaps one of the periods in the history of the French Empire when one saw the emergence of the greatest number of these mysterious fortunes whose origins are as obscure as the lust and debauchery that accompany them. It was toward the close of this period, and not long before the regent sought, by means of the famous tribunal, which goes under the name of the Chambre de Justice, to flush this multitude of traffickers, that four of them conceived the idea for the singular revels whereof we are going to give an account. One must not suppose that it was exclusively the low-born and vulgar sort which did this swindling. Gentlemen of the highest note led the pack. The Duke de Blangus and his brother the Bishop of XXX, each of whom had thuswise amassed immense fortunes, are in themselves solid proof that, like the others, the nobility neglected no opportunities to take this road to wealth. These two illustrious figures, through their pleasures and business, closely associated with the celebrated d'Ursay and the President de Courval, were the first to hit upon the debauch we propose to chronicle. And having communicated the scheme to their two friends, all four agreed to assume the major roles in these unusual orgies. For above 6 years, these four libertines, kindred through their wealth and tastes, had thought to strengthen their ties by means of alliances in which debauchery had by far a heavier part than any of the other motives that ordinarily serve as a basis for such bonds. What they arranged was as follows. The Duke de Blangus, thrice a widower and sire of 2 daughters one wife had given him, having noticed that the President de Courval appeared interested in marrying the elder of these girls, despite the familiarities he knew perfectly well her father had indulged in with her. The Duke, I say, suddenly conceived the idea of a triple alliance. "You want Julie for your wife," said he to Courval. "I give her to you unhesitatingly, and put but one condition to the match, that you'll not be jealous when, although your wife, she continues to show me the same complaisance she always has in the past. What is more, I'd have you lend your voice to mine in persuading our good d'Ursay to give me his daughter Constance, for whom, I must confess, I have developed roughly the same feelings you have formed for Julie. But," said Courval, "you are surely aware that d'Ursay just as libertine as you." Chapter Introduction Episode 2 The Rise of Secret Fortunes. "I know all that's to be known," the Duke rejoined. "In this age and with our manner of thinking, is one halted by such things? Do you think I seek a wife in order to have a mistress? I want a wife that my whims may be served. I want her to veil, to cover an infinite number of little secret debauches the cloak of marriage wonderfully conceals. In a word, I want her for the reasons you want my daughter. Do you fancy I am ignorant of your object and desires? We libertines wed women to hold slaves. As wives they are rendered more submissive than mistresses, and you know the value we set upon despotism in the joys we pursue." It was at this point d'Ursay entered. His two friends related their conversation, and, delighted by an overture which promptly induced him to avow the sentiments he too had conceived for Adelaide, the President's, d'Ursay accepted the Duke as his son-in-law, provided he might become Courval's. The 3 marriages were speedily concluded. The dowries were immense, the wedding contracts identical. No less culpable than his 2 colleagues, the President had admitted to d'Ursay, who betrayed no displeasure upon learning it, that he maintained a little clandestine commerce with his own daughter. The 3 fathers, each wishing not only to preserve his rights, but noticing here the possibility of extending them, commonly agreed that the three young ladies, bound to their husbands by goods and homes only, would not in body belong more to one than to any of them, and the severest punishments were prescribed for her who should take it into her head not to comply with any of the conditions whereunto she was subject. They were on the eve of realizing their plan, when the Bishop of XX, already close bound through pleasure shared with his brother's two friends, proposed contributing a fourth element to the alliance, should the other three gentlemen consent to his participation in the affair. This element, the Duke's second daughter and hence the Bishop's niece, was already more thoroughly his property than was generally imagined. He had effected connections with his sister-in-law, and the two brothers knew beyond all shadow of doubt that the existence of this maiden, who was called Aline, was far more accurately to be ascribed to the bishop than to the Duke. The former, who from the time she left the cradle had taken the girl into his keeping, had not, as one may well suppose, stood idle as the years brought her charms to flower. And so, upon this head, he was his colleague's equal, and the article he offered to put on the market was in an equal degree damaged or degraded. But as Aline's attractions and tender youth outshone even those of her three companions, she was unhesitatingly made a part of the bargain. As had the other three, the bishop yielded her up, but retained the rights to her use, and so each of our four characters thus found himself husband to four wives. Thus there resulted an arrangement which, for the reader's convenience, we shall recapitulate. Chapter Introduction. Episode 3. A Pact Hidden from Society. The Duke, Julie's father, became the husband of Constance, Dorset's daughter. Dorset, Constance's father, became the husband of Adelaide, the president's daughter. The president, Adelaide's father, became the husband of Julie, the Duke's elder daughter. And the bishop, Aline's uncle and father, became the husband of the other three females by ceding this same Aline to his friends, the while retaining the same rights over her. It was at a superb estate of the Duke, situated in the Bourbonnais, that these happy matches were made, and I leave to the reader to fancy how they were consummated and in what orgies. Obliged as we are to describe others, we shall forego the pleasure of picturing these. Upon their return to Paris, our four friends' association became only the firmer, and as our next task is to make the reader familiar with them. Before proceeding to individual and more searching developments, a few details of their lubricious arrangements will serve, it seems to me, to shed a preliminary light upon the character of these debauchees. The society had created a common fund, which each of its members took his turn administering for 6 months. The sums, allocated for nothing but expenses in the interests of pleasure, were vast. Their excessive wealth put the most unusual things within their reach. And the reader ought not be surprised to hear that 2 million were annually dispersed to obtain good cheer and lust satisfaction. 4 accomplished procuresses to recruit women, and a similar number of the pimps to scout out men, had the sole duty to range both the capital and the provinces and bring back everything, in the one gender and in the other, that could best satisfy their sensuality's demands. 4 supper parties were held regularly every week in 4 different country houses, located at 4 extremities of Paris. At the first of these gatherings, the one exclusively given over to the pleasures of sodomy, only men were present. There would always be at hand 16 young men, ranging in age from 20 to 30, whose immense faculties permitted our 4 heroes, in feminine guise, to taste the most agreeable delights. The youths were selected solely upon the basis of the size of their member, and it almost became necessary that this superb limb be of such magnificence that it could never have penetrated any woman. This was an essential clause, and as naught was spared by way of expense, only very rarely would it fail to be fulfilled. But simultaneously, to sample every pleasure, to these 16 husbands was joined the same quantity of boys, much younger, whose purpose was to assume the office of women. These lads were from 12 to. Chapter Introduction. Episode 4. The alliance strengthens. 18 years old, and to be chosen for service, each had to possess a freshness, a face, graces, charms, an air, an innocence, a candor which are far beyond what our brush could possibly paint. No woman was admitted to these masculine orgies, in the course of which everything of the lewdest invented in Sodom and Gomorrah was executed. At the second supper were girls of superior class, who, upon these occasions, forced to give up their proud ostentation and the customary insolence of their bearing, were constrained, in return for their hire, to abandon themselves to the most irregular caprices, and often even to the outrages our libertines were pleased to inflict upon them. 12 of these girls would appear, and as Paris could not have furnished a fresh supply of them, as often as would have been necessary, these evenings were interspersed with others, at which were admitted only in the same number as the well-bred ladies, women ranging from procuresses up through the class of officers' wives. There are above 4,000 or 5,000 in Paris who belong to one or the other of the two latter classes, and whom meed or lust obliges to attend soirees of this kind. One has but to have good agents to find them, and our libertines, who were splendidly represented, would frequently come across miraculous specimens. But it was in vain one was honest or a decent woman. One had to submit everything. Our lordship's libertinage, of a variety that never brooks limits, would overwhelm with horrors and infamies whatever, whether by nature or social convention, ought to have been exempt from such ordeals. Once one was there, one had to be ready for anything, and as our 4 villains had every taste that accompanies the lowest, most crapulous debauch, this fundamental acquiescence to their desires was not by any means a matter of inconsequence. The guests at the third supper were the vilest, foulest creatures that can possibly be met with. To him who has some acquaintance with debauchery's extravagances, this refinement will appear wholly understandable. 'Tis most voluptuous to wallow, so to speak, in filth with persons of this category. These exercises offer the completest abandon, the most monstrous intemperance, the most total abasement, and these pleasures, compared with those tasted the evening before, or with the distinguished individuals in whose company we have tasted them, have a way of lending a sharp spice to earlier activities. At these third suppers, debauch being more thorough, nothing was omitted that might render it complex and piquant. 100 whores would appear in the course of 6 hours, and only too often something less than the full 100 would leave the games. But there is nothing to be gained by hurrying our story, or by broaching subjects which can only receive adequate treatment in the sequel. As for the fourth supper, it was reserved for young maids. Only those between the ages of 7 and 15 were permitted. Their condition in life was of no importance. What counted was their looks. They had to be charming. As for their virginity, authentic evidence was required. Chapter Introduction, Episode 5, The Men Behind the Scheme. Incredible refinement of libertinage. It was not, assuredly, that they wished to pluck all those roses. And how indeed could they have done so? For those untouched flowers were always a score in number, and of our 4 libertines only 2 were capable of proceeding to the act. One of the remaining 2, the financier, being absolutely incapable of an erection, and the bishop being absolutely unable to take his pleasure save in a fashion which, yes, I agree, may dishonor a virgin, but which, however, always leaves her perfectly intact. No matter. The 20 maidenheads had to be there, and those which were not impaired by our quartet of masters became before their eyes the prey of certain of their valets just as depraved as they, whom they kept constantly at beck and call for more than one reason. Apart from these 4 supper parties, there was another, a secret and private one held every Friday, involving many fewer persons but surely costing a great deal more. The participants were restricted to 4 young and high-born damsels who, by means of strategy and money, had been abducted from their parents' homes. Our libertines' wives nearly always had a share in this debauch, and their extreme submissiveness, their docile attentions, their services made it more of a success each time. As for the genial atmosphere at these suppers, it goes without saying that even greater profusion than delicacy reigned there. Not one of these meals cost less than 10,000 francs, and neighboring countries as well as all France were ransacked, so that what was of the rarest and most exquisite might be assembled together. Fine and abundant wines and liquors were there, and even during the winter they had fruits of every season. In a word, one may be certain that the table of the world's greatest monarch was not dressed with as much luxury, nor served with equal magnificence. But now let us retrace our steps and do our best to portray one by one each of our 4 heroes, to describe each not in terms of the beautiful, not in a manner that would seduce or captivate the reader, but simply with the brushstrokes of nature which, despite all her disorder, is often sublime. Indeed, even when she is at her most depraved, for, and why not say so in passing, if crime lacks the kind of delicacy one finds in virtue, is not the former always more sublime? Does it not unfailingly have a character of grandeur and sublimity which surpasses, and will always make it preferable to, the monotonous and lackluster charms of virtue? Will you protest the greater usefulness of this or of that? Is it for us to scan nature's laws, ours to determine whether, vice being just as necessary to nature as is virtue, she perhaps does not implant in us in equal quantity, the penchant for one or the other, depending upon her respective needs? But let us proceed. The Duc de Blangus, at 18 the master of an already colossal fortune, which his later speculations much increased, experienced all the difficulties which descend like a cloud of locusts.